Hello. Well, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us. I'm really delighted to share the stage with Professor Nuria Pulido, Laszlo Lovac, and Gabriele Conte. So I would like immediately to start by saying that it's a great honor for me to be here together with you and to say that the theme is as fascinating as difficult. I would like to profit from the presence of such eminent scientists to share views more as questions than firm opinions. Let me start by what I understand by scientific breakthrough. In the scientific context, I think we are referring to the breaking through a wall of fog that prevents us from understanding things. And I take a wider definition of understanding, which includes the capacity to comprehend phenomena, test them, and build systems that behave according to what we derived from our scientific process. From the moments of inception to the building and mastering of technology, there is a whole fabric of ideas, the production of positive and, what not saying it, negative results. We are giving these days the extraordinary example of the messenger RNA technology used in the COVID-19 response. And this is certainly a breakthrough that our societies became aware, given the impact on our personal and collective lives. And I don't think we need to stress how much frontier research is a critical component of the research ecosystem. Let me recall some of the principles for such ecosystem to work well. Recognize the freedom of research and the selection of paths. Ensure intense scientific interaction with peers to ensure scrutiny and quality. Be patient and correct the research path along the way. And from policymakers and research funders, we need adequate set of incentives which balance competition and collaboration. It is important to ensure that frontier research is well funded, and I'm sure that we all here are very glad that we have a strong base with the New Horizon Europe program. But it's true that my main point today that I want to listen to you, to see how we arrive to such last and visible breakthrough, because I'm sure that before there is so much invisible breakthrough, incremental breakthrough, if I may use this sentence, and that is a long road from the initial ideas to the production of the vaccine. But here we have experienced people that can share with us your knowledge on the ground, your vision, what's about the next steps. So I'm sure that together we can not only again say how important is frontier research, but to see how together we can define a better European support for this frontier research. I would like really to stop here. That was my little moment at the beginning to express my respect to you, and at the same time, yes, to say that I'm very eager now to listen to your views and to see how together we can continue to tackle some of our common challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. It was great to hear you espouse the values that you highlighted. These are indeed very important. Hello to everybody watching this session. Welcome to the session from me. My name is Philip Campbell. I'm Editor-in-Chief of the research publisher Springer Nature. And it's my privilege to be the moderator of this session, exploring COVID-19 responses by distinguished researchers funded by the European Research Council. The European Research Council is one of the gems of the European research landscape, so it's always a pleasure to work with it. We hope to have time for questions and answers for you, the audience, later in the session. Please ask any questions in the chat. So let me first introduce the panelists. We have Professor Nuria Montserrat Pulido, who is a biologist working at the Institute for Bioengineering in Catalonia, Spain. And her work includes focusing on biological mechanisms in artificial mini organs grown in the laboratory. We have Professor Laszlo Lovász, is an expert in the mathematics of graphs, and his ERC project is highly multidisciplinary, involving innovations in the links between graph theory, which is his expertise, and the dynamics of networks, social networks, biological networks, language networks. And last but not least, Dr. Gabriele Conte is an economist based in University College London, and her work focuses on societal shocks as they affect health systems and in particular impacts on the development of young children, the economic aspects of that, and ways of mitigating such damage. So, each of our panelists will address the topic of this session for a few minutes each, and I may ask each a question after, depending on how the time goes. So please, over to Professor Montserrat Pulido.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this kind invitation and also for being here and the words of the Commissioner. So in the laboratory, we are mainly focused in generating fundamental knowledge to understand how tissues in humans develop. And we've been founded by the ERC within the framework of the ERC starting grant to understand how kidney develops. So in the laboratory, we generated mini organs, in this case, mini kidneys, to understand how this tissue develops during embryonic development, but also how this organ gets disease. And by the time of COVID-19 outbreak, it was already shown that the virus was using a specific receptor that is not only encountered in the respiratory tract, but also in the kidney. So we were able to put in place our technology developed in the framework of the ERC to understand how SARS-CoV-2 infects human cells, in this case, human kidney cells. And we exploit our technology also in collaboration with other researchers. Nowadays, our main focus exploiting organoid technology, these mini kidneys, has been also funded by the ERC within the program of the ERC colleague grant, and we are going to be able to further continue putting very fundamental questions about how the kidney get disease, also exploiting the organoid. So I would like to highlight that thanks to this fundamental knowledge, to understand how the tissue gets differentiated, how the tissue conforms a kidney, we were able to make more questions and more results in the framework of the COVID-19 outbreak, also identifying a therapeutic compound that was tested and validated in our mini organs to block SARS-CoV-2 infection. Other thing I want to highlight is that the ERC also exposed us to a very strong network of collaborators who also are holding ERC grants, not only in Europe, but also other collaborators nowadays all over the world. So this is my 2-minute speech that I want to use for introducing myself, also the work that we do in the framework of the ERC, and how this fundamental basic science that the Commissioner was commenting can lead sometimes to further investigations now in the framework of COVID-19, but I'm sure that this knowledge is going to be used also for other fundamental questions and very important diseases that occur in the kidney, which is one of the major target organs that is affected due to primary diseases in the organ, but also due to diabetes, for example, which is a major epidemic globally. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Could you just comment a little bit? You can't have anticipated when you started on this particular program that COVID-19 was going to hit. So I'm interested to know to what extent you had to adapt your program of work and what the ERC did to help with that.
Yeah, so thank you for this question. So the fact is that during February, as soon as February, we were having some information coming from other peers around the world telling a bit about how SARS-CoV-2 was infecting human cells, but nothing was known about really how this was going to be addressed in the laboratory, which systems could be used for addressing this important question. So we could very easily what technology was developing in the lab at that moment for putting very important questions as how SARS-CoV-2 infects human cells, making use of these kidney organoids. And most importantly, during the COVID-19 outbreak, we all the ERC guarantees, we were approached by the ERC already asking how COVID-19 was impacting in our research and if we were already undertaking research in the framework of the COVID-19 outbreak. So in our case, that was really helpful. We could immediately adapt our research into the need of the society, into the need of the pandemics, and more importantly, always being in close contact with the ERC, we could even exploit and also disseminate better our technology. And that really was very helpful for other researchers to approach us to make use of our technology and our platform for understanding a bit more about this COVID-19 disease in kidney organoids and also using other organoids, like in this case, vascular organoids.
Thank you. Later on, it might be good to hear about the pathway from your insights to actual application. But first, I want to go on to our other panelists. So, Professor Lavage, please give us your thoughts about the research you're doing and the theme of the session.
Thank you very much. So, my research interest is the mathematical theory of very large networks. That has been for about 20 years now. And the reason for that was that we realized with my colleagues that the world is described by networks. Networks play a central role, and at the same time, we know very little about networks. It's not to the same degree as, say, the theory of continuous materials or other classical fields. And so with Laszlo Barabashi and Jarek Nezsetsél, we formulated a proposal for the ERC, synergy proposal, dynamics and structure of networks. And we thought that we listed a number of topics there which were obviously connected to this area and implications of this research. And we mentioned as one of them the theory of network propagation over social networks and the understanding of how this works. And of course, when the epidemic hit, we decided to sort of promote this particular topic to the front of our interest. And we started to look at the mathematical possibilities. Basically, there were two approaches already existing before. One was based on aggregated data and say aggregating people by age groups and then writing up differential equations describing how one age group influences the other. And the other possibility was to look at this network approach. And we, of course, started the network approach, but we have very good connection with the people who do the other aggregated approach. It is they do actual predictions for the government. We are in contact, but we do not want to compete in this area. However, our research does come up with some special features of network propagation, which should be important for things like how to test and what to test and how to make predictions on this based on these tests in a possible next wave or a possible next epidemics. One of these findings was, for example, that the distribution of the original infection is is very influential on the eventual outcome, on the size of the wave, but at the same time, the connection is not an easy one to describe, and it's quite complex. So things like that, and then give mathematical justification, ideally mathematical proofs and algorithms, is our goal. Of course, there are many other tasks for mathematics raised by this COVID, from problems in statistics to geometric modeling of the virus, to the use of artificial intelligence, for example, in recognizing unusual patterns in the spread of the disease, or propagation of the disease. For example, recognize super spreaders or super spread events. And I think maybe one more sentence about the general philosophy connected to this. I think this is like a war situation, and like during every war, science progresses because people focus more. This happens here too. We have developed among ourselves, mathematicians, much better understanding between applied mathematicians and theoretical mathematicians. And I am pretty sure that there will be a lot of positive impact besides the terrible negative impacts, like some of our colleagues dying. Thank you.
Let me just ask, your work is very fundamental. It is about the mathematics of what happens in networks. I'm intrigued to know to what extent, as it became clear of the relevance of your project as a whole to the pandemic, your aspect of it was needing to change, if at all, because your maths is, as it were, fundamental. So was your own mathematical agenda affected by COVID significantly?
Yeah, so in a nutshell, I have a small group of 5 people, and of connection with other people, but basically we work together on this. And that group is composed of 2-3 mathematicians and 2-3 physicists who are network scientists. And it is indeed, I think, important for both of us to understand how the approach of the other one is needed to get the best result. My own influence on this is that I am trying to push for mathematical results, because I think that no matter how many simulations and heuristics and not rigorous arguments are there, in extreme situations, these will not work. But rigorous mathematical results work also in extreme situations. And so this is a collaboration in this sense. I am myself working, trying to make the heuristic arguments and simulations more rigorous, and my colleagues are producing very interesting results about simulations. Also, we are collaborating with some agencies of the government, and we are getting some interesting data, which also changes our view on some of these issues.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Dr. Conte, over to you.
Yes, hi everyone. Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to speak here. My name is Gabriele Conte. I'm an economist, associate professor at University College London, and I work on what I call a developmental approach to health policy. So I study public and private investment and interventions aimed at preventing the onset or reducing health inequalities from a preventative approach rather than dealing with costly treatment once health conditions are already established. This implies that a lot of my work is focused on the early years of life. And so in particular, I study preventative intervention in the prenatal period and in more or less the 0-5 period. And throughout my career, I've studied several interventions and show that improving the life chances, especially of disadvantaged children in the early years of life, can reduce inequalities in health and improve health throughout the life course, which obviously good benefits to the public purse. And I have an ERC consolidator where I study more in depth this theme. So in particular, my research is focused on the role of shocks, investment and policies, and also biology in understanding the early origins of health and the role of early interventions. And so when the COVID-19 happened, it seems quite natural to me to start studying it, because already in my ERC research, I was working on shocks such as the influenza, for example, like the avian flu, but also interventions to try and improve life chances of children, especially home visiting programs, prenatally up to age 2, and then enriched childcare. And so when the pandemic started, I was lucky enough that I could use my ERC funds to focus in particular on England, where is the bulk of my research, and then to study in particular how the COVID-19 pandemic was affecting parents and young children. I've been focusing in particular on the 0-5 because this was an age group which was at the beginning not at the center of interest. Why? First, because it seemed quite clear they were relatively less directly affected by COVID than older age groups, and also because there wasn't really like a lot of discourse about the 0-5s compared to, for example, the older children who were missing out in schooling. And this has been the case so far, and there's been relatively little research on the 0-5. And so in my work during COVID, I in particular focused on the effects on parents and children, and in particular on the effects through the health visiting workforce, the universal health visiting program happening in England. And I have conducted the original data collections via Freedom of Information request, showing that a key universal public health intervention, which in theory should prevent the emergence of health inequalities, promote health, and save money later in life, was actually in pretty strict and stretched conditions before the pandemic, and was further slashed during the pandemic at a very unequal rate, so that inequalities which are already pre-existing are at risk of increasing further if we don't intervene. On the other hand, I've also focused on what we call private investments, so what parents, how parents have been affected, how they've reacted to the pandemic, for example, in sending the children to childcare, which is another public investment aim at reducing inequality, reducing the effects of shocks on children. And this in general, we fall into a research that I've undertaken aimed at integrating economic model of behavior to incorporating this additional epidemiological risk coming from the COVID-19 pandemic. So then if we think about economic models for individuals decide which action to take, trading off costs and benefits in, under uncertainty, in this case, we had to incorporate into economic models also the additional health risk coming from possibility of being infected. And so we have also studied this in the context of the individual's compliance decision. And yeah, we're just at the beginning of an ongoing agenda aimed at understanding the full impacts of COVID and how policies and individuals react to it.
Thank you very much. It's sometimes difficult for a prevention approach, whether it's couched in economic terms or in health terms, to compete in policymakers' minds with direct treatment that you could apply and see immediate results. And I'm just wondering to what extent your work helps promote the prevention work in the eyes of stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is really a question at the very key of my research agenda. And this is really, a very important issue, not only among, academic, among, of course, policymakers, but among even, practitioners. I was talking to some health visitors yesterday for my research to try to understand, which outcome we can look at to estimate the impacts on children, and they were telling me this is our problem of prevention, that we don't see a lot of results until, often, it's further down the line. So I've done this in different ways. On the one hand, I've been lucky enough to study long-term follow-ups, often randomized controlled trials or intervention improving life chances of children happening many years ago. So in that case, it is true you have to consider that the circumstances were different and the counterfactual were probably different from today, but then you can compute all the benefits which have been accumulated by the treatment group as compared to the control group, say soon after the intervention, but also following many years down the road. And when you look at across different outcomes, ranging from child development, but also education, labor market outcomes, health, reduced crime, even if you then account for discounting, because these are going to happen, many years after the intervention, and then you discount them, you get the present value, and you compare to the cost, then many of these interventions actually have positive returns. And so they give significant, benefits as compared to the costs they incur. So there are a few caveats, of course. Not all interventions gain benefits. And so one particular important thing to understand is to understand what are the characteristics of those interventions which are beneficial, what are the mechanisms through which they work, because this is the only way in which we can try and replicate good interventions. One particular important aspect that I'm studying also thanks to my ERC is the role of the workforce delivering this intervention, which is key and has been not a lot studied until now. And then another thing is that a lot of interventions, especially public health programs, are not evaluated. And so we are in a regime where it's most of the time, or well, at least good part of the time, really it's political will or a political, direction rather than evidence-based, which is driving which intervention happen and which don't. Just to give a reference again to the programs and studies such as the health visiting, before I started evaluating the health visiting, amazingly, there was no evaluation of a program which is universal at scale and for at least a century in England. So this should definitely be more evaluation and more cost-benefit analysis and more evidence-based to drive policies.
Thank you. So I'm now going to feed in a question that came in from the chat, and it is a very timely question, I think. So the involvement of citizens in setting scientific agendas is something that's been thought about for many years and is being practiced very actively in some research areas. And it can apply even in quite fundamental areas when you're looking at a long-term and maybe even a controversial topic, like, for example, in the early days of nanotechnology, where there was a lack of trust as to what it meant amongst citizens. So funding agencies as well as researchers are taking an interest in the role of citizens. So I'm going to ask each of you, but I'll start in the reverse order. So Dr. Conte first, and then Dr. Lovash, and then Professor Montserrat-Pulio. Can you just say anything about how you would like citizens, or have you been involved with citizens in thinking about this very frontier research? And I must ask you to keep it brief because we have other questions. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a great question. It's super important to, as I say, co-produce with citizens. And it's certainly something that I'm doing. Just to give a couple of examples, in the data collection, one of those that we did to understand the effects of the pandemic on parents. So we asked the parents what was the experience of the pandemic and what they felt we should, research more, or what they felt would be policies aimed at improving the life chances, but also in the evaluation of actually one of the home visiting programs in my ERC, the Family Nurse Partnership. There we have also involved a group of parents who are aimed at discussing the results of the research and also, really helping us in understanding and driving also part of the further research questions. So it's absolutely crucial because we do research for them to improve their life chances.
Thank you. Professor Lovash. We can't hear you.
Mathematics is in a difficult position here because general public usually dislikes mathematics, and it's very difficult to explain what is going on. It takes takes long study. I think that the most important thing is to explain that mathematics is not a dead subject. It's different from what you remember from high school. It's completely different now, and it has so much influence on your life, from mobile phones to statistics to predictions for epidemics. If we can explain this, then we at least get moral support from the general public. And the other thing where we get support is young people who might become interested in mathematics, perhaps even in high school, certainly during their university studies. And that's a group which we have to build our first of all, our future upon, and second, which can help us in the research.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I can't resist backing you up, because both my sons studied mathematics, pure mathematics at university, and are now outside in the real world, being, I hope, useful in that different ways. Professor Montserrat Pulido, please, over to you about citizens and your work.
Yeah, this is a very good question indeed, because we all need to disseminate our findings and also to make citizens part of the process of our research, and also to create channels for that to make happen. And I think that in the field of biology, sometimes this is easier because we have different channels like outreach activities, in where also we are engaging patient associations, in our case, for example, who are the best ambassadors for really transmitting the need to work in fundamental research for funding an application, in this case, for example, a therapy. So the field of organoids is quite new, and it had been a real boom in the area of stem cell biology, but also for many people in the audience, many citizens, there were a lot of questions also related with ethics, and also how we were converting cells into mini organs. And I think that, for example, here in our institute, but also in Spain and also in the framework of Europe, we have the opportunity to work side by side with patient associations, which, as I mentioned, are the best ambassadors for make this happening. And in our case, this has been really fruitful. So we have been getting a lot of collaborations with patient associations in Spain, and also working side by side also here with the Institute of Health in our country, for spreading the word about what we do and what this fundamental research, trying to understand how a tissue or organ develop, can have an impact in the long run for funding, for example, a therapy for a patient.
Thank you. In a minute, I'm going to hand over to the Commissioner, who I know wants to talk to you. But first, Professor Montserrat Pulido, I just wanted to ask a final quick question for you. I mean, your insights are clearly helping understand the way parts of the body react to COVID-19. Is there an obvious pathway to where your work goes into the treatments eventually, or other aspects? And does the ERC help you with that?
Yeah, so ERC help a lot in developing like the knowledge to get into the point in where we can have a robust procedure to generate these mini organs. And then also in the framework of this same project, in the COVID-19 outbreak, we were focused on trying to validate a therapeutic compound, which was described already for pulmonary disease. So that compound is a soluble human recombinant protein that acts as a false gate for the virus. So we tried that compound in these mini organs. And also we were making use of other compounds that were already tested during the pandemics, as remdesivir and others, in our cultures. So this has been really helpful. And I think that this type of research, also not only from my lab, but many other labs around the world developing these mini organs, coming from the very fundamental question about how a brain develops or how a kidney develops, put into the scenario these culture platforms for drug screening. And now we are currently doing research on that regard, also applying genome editing. So perturbing the expression of some of these receptors that are important for COVID-19, and also testing compounds in this particular framework. So we can advance a lot on these questions, making use of humanized models, not animal models, but more humanized models for these fundamental type of questions. Yes.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, it's been great talking to you all, and I know that the Commissioner wants to speak to you, so I will now hand over to her.
Thank you very much, Sir Philip. First of all, I would like really to say thank you for your insights, and as always, a very rich discussion. I must say that when you participate in a panel conference organized by European Research Council, it's always a pleasure. It's always so inspiring, and at the same time, I must say that you start to receive a lot of answers, and you start to have yourself a lot of questions. So my first question is, because it's really important to take our citizens more on board, to communicate with them, and that's my question: how to improve our communication to wider audiences? Because I think that it's really crucial to address our young generations, but the rest of the society, because trust in science, it's just not something that we can take for something that we have for all the time. And during the crisis, we all have seen that. That's one first question. The second, I listened very carefully. I fully agree, Professor Montserrat Pulida, that we need to have this flexible fundamental research, because with your examples, we have seen how with the crisis, and that was the same for Professor Conte and Professor Lovac, you managed immediately to see how your research can be useful in new situations, with new challenges, providing new solutions. So my question, because yes, I'm the commissioner responsible for European Research Council, but for the European Innovation Council too. So my question is how we can better combine this need to support, to have this flexible frontier research, and at the same time to capture and to invest in innovative ideas that will take us to disruptive innovation. So if you have some suggestions, I will stay very open to listen to you.
So maybe I can start answering on the first question, like ways to improve communication with citizens, and also to make them part of our research, and also profit from them for making ambassadors of our science, as I was commenting, that happen spontaneously with patient associations most of the times, or all of the times. So I think that we need to simplify a lot what we do. And Professor Laszlo was telling about that, no, from the field of mathematics, how distant it looks for many people. But sometimes we forget to put very simple examples when we explain our research. So this will be really important for us to arrive into the whole community, and also to profit a lot outreach activities with families. We need to target not only young people, but also parents and grandparents, so the whole society, because at the end, kids are the future for our society. And most of the times we have not only parents, but also grandparents involved in their education, especially in South countries in Europe. And in that regard, here in Spain and in my city, in Barcelona, we are exploiting several programs in where we are disseminating science through Women in Science. So we have a program which is called 100 Scientists, which are targeting 400 schools at the same time, the same day, the 11th of February, which is the International Day of Girls and Women in Science. And now we have been taking advantage of this first pilot experiment to make use of this outreach activity, targeting parents, but also grandparents, because I think that they are the real ambassadors. If we can make all the society understand our science, and this going back and forth between the different aging groups, from kids to toddlers, parents and grandparents, I think that in this manner, we have a very native manner to communicate our research. And as researchers, we learn a lot in this process, how to communicate our science to all the the ages in the society. And maybe for the second part of the question or the other questions you were having, I will leave also to my colleagues to talk. And if not, I will come back to this.
Yeah.
Professor Lovat.
I have finished about a year ago my presidency of the Hungarian Academy, and I have been, one of my main targets has been to popularize science, to fight against pseudoscience, and in general to make the general public more aware of what science is doing. My experience is that it's a really hard uphill battle. It's science is getting very complicated, very complex, and so people are afraid of it. And you are afraid of what you don't understand, what you don't know. And therefore, all sorts of pseudoscience can easily get a hold on a large part of this population. There are people, of course, and there's a non-negligible group who deny that this virus exists at all, or that vaccines are any useful. Some people, these kind of things are very difficult to fight, but we have to keep fighting. So this is the situation where we cannot win, but we must not lose. So we have to go fighting on, and all forms are good. I was hoping that this epidemic will somehow enforce trust in science. Maybe it does, but still there are very nasty voices against vaccines and against other important scientific results here. I think we have to go out and talk to young people and give public lectures and the number, use all forms that you can.
Thank you. Professor Conte.
Yeah, so I want to say three things. I agree with what you said so far. So in particular, with the work that I do, that I study interventions in improving life chances of children, a lot of what these interventions do is provide information to parents and caregivers about what are, the best investment behavior to have to improve child development. So that implies that, the best science is used to enter as, content of this particular intervention, and it's distilled to parents and caregiver in a way they can understand. And so very recently, there was a study in the United Kingdom which made quite the news because it was found that I think a third of the parents didn't believe that the early years were the most critical period for child development, while in reality we know from a lot of research that it is quite the critical period. And so since then, at least in England, there has been a lot of discussion about how to spread this information more widely, how to make parents and general public more aware about the latest development of research of neuroscience, but also from economics about the importance of returns from the early years. And I agree a lot of that is about spreading the message wide, and a lot of this also simplifying the message. And I do also a lot of outreach, a lot of engagement activities. Just to give a couple of examples in relation to the health visiting work, I once had as give a lecture, or mostly a talk about the economics of early intervention to health visitors and other practitioners, and I found a way to explain to them the concept of production function of health. And I was really, really happy because after, more than one of them, they told me, I finally understand, this concept. I thought they were really difficult, but you put them in a way that now I understand what's needed, to produce health from an economic perspective. Why it's important to think, to have an economic framework, to think about long-term returns and think about cost. And then the other thing, I also really care a lot about talking to young people, and especially about girls. Economics is one of the fields in which there is too little women and girl representation. And especially very recently, I've joined a lot talking to especially girls in high school, to tell them, you know, about my research, about why you don't have to be scared about economics. Yeah, there is some math, but it's really useful to use math. And you can really help to explaining and understanding and also contributing a lot to societal problems. So I really found it absolutely, you know, fantastic to be an economist.
Thank you very much, professors. I think that we have 15 seconds less. So from my side, Sir Philip Campbell, it's up to you now. But I'd like to say thank you very much. I think that today that was clear that we continue to raise and to send some strong messages. Yes, we need support for fundamental research. We need to work on networks. We need to invest as early as possible in research because we prevent negative impacts later. So that means that science research that saves lives, that makes us as a society more resilient, better prepared for future. And I think that that was obvious today that we have great communicators here. My wish is to have as much as possible people like you to continue not only to convince our citizens that science is here for them, but that together we can transform the science into the driver of the European future. Thank you so much.